This is the 35th part in my project to recreate Kings Island in Parkitect. This video is a speed build of my recreation of Banshee at Kings Island. Banshee opened at Kings Island on April 18th, 2014. It's a Bolliger Mabyard inverted steel coaster. Banshee stands 167 feet tall with a drop of 150 feet and a top speed of 68 miles per hour. It features 7 inversions, a track length of 4,124 feet, and a duration of 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Banshee opened at Kings Island at a cost of $24 million in 2014 and still holds the record to this day as the world's longest inverted coaster. Now let me just start by saying this part of the project took me forever. You'll only see about 2.5 hours of footage, but I spent at least 20 hours working on this. The ride's lift hill and main drop were at a 45-degree angle, and Parkitect does not like 45-degree angles. You can't have sloped 45-degree angle turns, and that's essentially what Banshee's drop is, a 45-degree slope turn. This build was essentially impossible with the base game. This recreation could not have been made in vanilla Parkitect. I used the mod Track Edit to customize the layout as much as possible, and I used the mod Coaster Anarchy to allow for elements that the game normally wouldn't allow. Even Coaster Anarchy doesn't allow for 45-degree angle sloped turns, so I actually had to mod the mod. I went into the mod's config files, I added a line of code to allow broken elements, and finally I was able to make Banshee's main drop. This essentially broke the game though. I had multiple crashes, I had multiple error screens, it was a disaster. The best way I could describe it is if you're trying to recreate a Renaissance painting and the only tool I give you is a broken crayon. I mean, sure, it's possible, but Parkitect was not the right tool for this job. I have spent 4 days straight working on this part of the project, nearly 20 to 30 hours at least. All the parts where the game crashed or I got an error screen or the coaster itself broke, I just cut those out of the footage. This is probably 10% of the total playtime I had in the game this week. So in the footage, it looks like it took me 2.5 hours, but in reality, it took me probably close to 24, 25. So this was only made possible using the Track Edit 2 mod and using the Coaster Anarchy mod, which I then had to mod. So this was definitely the hardest part of this project so far. This took me a very, very long time. It was possible. I completed this using these mods, but it was extremely buggy. The game crashed many times. The coaster itself fell apart because the game was so confused as to what I was trying to do. It was very buggy, it was very difficult. It was very frustrating and unpleasant, but at last I have completed Banshee. And as you can see right here, I'm almost completed with the ride layout. I am redoing the pretzel loop right here. This was one of the hardest parts of the ride to recreate. Using Track Edit, it was possible, just very buggy, very difficult, very frustrating. The ride actually dives back under itself, going out of the pretzel loop, and that was very, very difficult to recreate. I finally got it, it just took me many tries. There's probably 30 tries that I cut out of the video. You're only seeing the final try, the final attempt in which I succeed, but trust me, there were many, many more tries where I failed. I failed and failed and failed until I finally got it right. The same is very true with the first drop. That first drop probably took me close to 50 or 60 tries before I finally got it perfect, and I was happy enough to put that into the video. I spent countless tries on the first drop until I had a version that I was happy enough with, and I could move on to the rest of the ride layout. And as you can see right here in the video, I am recreating the inline twist again and again until I have a version that I am happy enough with, and I can move on to the rest of the ride. This part of the project was very much just trial and error. I would try and try again and constantly get it wrong until one time I get a result that I'm proud of and I'm happy with, and then I would just move on to the next part of the ride and try and try and try. So just know that in the video it looks like this took me no time at all, A, because it's sped up 10 times, and B, because the timer says 2 hours 30 minutes. But it took me a very, very, very long time. I put a lot of effort behind this, and I'm very proud of how it turned out. So hopefully you're able to appreciate that and enjoy the final product. And at this point in the video, I have just about the entire ride layout finished. I am now working on the brake run and the station. Another thing about Parkitect that makes this very difficult is that these stations can only be placed at 90-degree angles. So I could either have Banshee's station facing Delirium or Adventure Express, but in real life it's not facing either of those angles. So I just had to choose one angle and kind of stick with it and try to make it work the best I could. You'll see me kind of pick up the ride and move it around a couple times throughout this video. You can't do that in Parkitect. I actually had to save the ride as a blueprint, delete the ride, and then place it again at different areas. I'm trying my best to make this a perfect one-to-one recreation of Kings Island, so I'm trying to make this line up perfectly with the service roads, make it line up perfectly with Delirium. I'm trying to have the ride track be exactly where it needs to be and where it should be in real life. It's not going to be exactly perfect, but I tried to get it the best I could. I used Delirium, I used Adventure Express, I used the service roads as reference points. I would measure the distance between those points and the ride's track, and I think I got it pretty close to real life. And now, at this point of the video, I'm working on terraforming all the land around the ride. Banshee actually sits on a hill, and after the 0G roll, the ride dips down a little bit and goes lower, so I'm working on lowering the terrain around the second half of the ride. After that, I took a little break from terraforming and I started work on the low zone restricted area fences. So every time a roller coaster gets close to the ground and could potentially hit someone, that's called a low zone, and there has to be fences around that area to prevent people from entering that area. As far as I could tell, Banshee has 5 low zones. That includes the first drop, 1 after the dive loop, 1 after the vertical loop, 1 at the bottom of the 0G roll, and the final one is all the way from the pretzel loop to the inline twist. It took me a while to get the shaping right on the low zone fences, but once again, it was just a matter of trial and error. I just tried until I got it perfect, and I think it turned out pretty well. The low zones also required some terraforming, and then afterwards, I started work on detailing and painting the terrain. Just adding some small details like gravel and rocks into the low zones, dead grass in the low zones, things like that. I was using Google Earth satellite imagery to see what the terrain looked like in all of these areas, and then I just used the Parkitect terrain tools to paint it to look as close as possible to the real life counterpart. After I was done with the low zones, then I tried to get the service roads as close as possible to real life. I'm using some of the service roads as reference points, so I wanted to get these as accurate as possible. And for whatever reason, Banshee has a ton of service roads. Going behind it, going through the layout, going just everywhere around Banshee. So the service roads actually took me a little bit longer than expected to recreate. And after completing the service roads, it was just time for finishing touches, like the queue, the station, the exit, the entrance, the ride signs, the pathways around the ride, and of course all the catwalks and handrails on the ride. Those took me forever. As you'll see here shortly, I did recreate all the catwalks on the ride the best I could. I used a mod. The mod's just called Catwalks, and it adds catwalks as scenery items to the game. It sounds simple enough, but the problem is that these are all individual pieces, and the lift hill of the ride, the main drop, the brake run, everything that needs catwalks is at a really weird angle. They're all at 45-degree angles, and the mod is very limited in its diagonal pieces. For example, there's no safety nets that are diagonal, so I had to take the normal safety net that's at a 0-degree angle. So I would just place them down in a line. I would place one down, and then one square up and one square to the left, and then one square up and one square to the left, so it's kind of at a 45-degree angle, but it doesn't really look as good. And I couldn't make any diagonal safety nets at a 45-degree incline either, so for the most part I just skipped the safety nets. I did put a lot of time and effort into the catwalks though, and I think those turned out pretty good. You'll see me struggle with those here shortly. And in case you aren't aware, parts of this project release on this channel every Tuesday this summer. Today's upload is a little late, just because this part of the project took me so long, but hey, it's still Tuesday. I normally upload at 10 AM on Tuesday, but this is probably going up at like 5 or 6 PM, but it's still Tuesday. There's also a link to my Patreon in the description of this video. Supporting my channel on Patreon is what makes projects like these possible, so if you're enjoying this project, supporting the channel on Patreon would go a long way. Make sure to stick around until the end of the video. After the speed build, I have footage of the ride running, and you can compare my recreation of Banshee to Banshee in real life. Now enjoy the rest of the speed build. And now my recreation of Banshee at Kings Island is complete, and here's a look at the finished product. Well, that's all for this part of the project. If you'd like to see more parts of this project, there's a link to the playlist in the description of this video, and be sure to check back every Tuesday this summer. Like always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.